Hi everyone, and welcome to our newest podcast. And today we need to talk about Kevin, ironically, and we're going to do a psychoanalysis of the book by Lionel Shriver. So just a quick summary in case you haven't read it. It's about Eva, who her son is a school shooter, and is in estranged letters to her husband. She talks about the life and the events leading up to it, and specifically, did she cause anything for him to become this violent person and doing these violent things? So this leads us onto the big question, nature vs nurture. We're going to be talking about two things specifically today. Kevin and the relationship between him and his mum. So let's start with Kevin.
Yeah. So starting off with Kevin, let's just define what we mean by sociopath. So that's antisocial personality disorder, generally characterized by lack of empathy, agitative, instigation, lack of remorse or guilt. And so from birth, the character exhibits those personality qualities. And so looking at how we might be able to explain this and looking at some biological evidence for this, in our frontal cortex, which is all about our personalities and our decision making and our emotions impacting decisions, we have a part called our ventral medial prefrontal cortex. And associated with this, when it becomes damaged, it's been linked to cause these sort of tendencies in people where they become distant from relatives. So in 2019, they conducted a study where they looked at people who had damaged this part of their brain. And in 85 of those cases, people started to become very distant from their families. They started to become like these sociopathic qualities, sort of distancing themselves from other people, becoming quite agitative, instigating conflict. And so what this might say about the whole nature nurture debate is that might say that, okay, well, it's a biological cause and effect. So
there's got to be like a mutation in his brain that can be blamed on this, and it's obviously been developed over time. Yeah.
So the problem then isn't with identifying it so much, but it is in how do you then solve that issue? Because if you're starting to say, okay, well, if we know what the cause is, then if we start screening for it, then we can stop people from becoming like this kid or other kids like Adam Lanza, who killed 26 people in a school shooting. But
so this mention of screening, now ethics just comes in my mind. There is none at this point.
Yeah, ethics went out the window pretty quick after that one.
But let's take Kevin. So Kevin never had, let's say, violent tendencies.
No.
Do we screen him at the beginning, right at birth? And
well,
then
if you follow the biological evidence, you would say so. Like, for example, if you can tell that someone's ventral medial prefrontal cortex is damaged, or part of their frontal lobe is damaged, which is where we control most of our personality and decision making, then you might go, okay, well, we might want to stop this person from getting their hands on certain pieces of equipment, like guns or knives.
I was actually just thinking because a UK psychologist, Adrian Raine, did this study where he got 41 murderers who pleaded, murderers who pleaded not guilty for reasons of insanity. And then he scanned their brains and then he measured to see, the densities, if there was a correlation between insanity and mutations in the brain. And he picked one up and he put one in the bad pile of psychopath, and that ended up being his brain. Now, if we use the logic of let's screen everyone and kind of separate them, we could be separating normal people like these psychologists. So
yeah, you can, because there are people in sort of higher up businesses, boardrooms, and sort of the elite of the business world do generally have like higher psychopathic trait.
American Psycho.
Basically American Psycho.
Yeah.
These very wealthy people who are very successful are largely successful because they have those psychopathic qualities where they're very cutthroat and very ruthless, and they don't have much empathy.
Dangerous, no.
Exactly. That doesn't necessarily mean they're dangerous. But the question is, do you then screen those people?
How do you prevent that from happening? And
exactly.
I mean, obviously, we could do the normal protocol of banning guns, and then
yeah, America doesn't really want to follow suit with that, does it?
But in terms of, you know, screening at birth, it's much like this kind of controversial thing about screening embryos and choosing characteristics. Like this, just ethically ethically it wouldn't work, and also biologically, how you know, it's just that our brains aren't fully formed. They don't stop forming till we're about 20 something. So
yeah,
you know, that density, I could have that density. I could be a criminal.
Yeah, true. Completely true. And talking about other biological evidence, like it's not just one part of the brain. This is where it gets kind of a little bit complex.
Yeah.
A little bit similar to Phineas Gage, the guy that had a railway thing shoved through his frontal lobe and changed all his personalities. A little bit similar. There's another case study known as EVR. Yeah. And so what happened there was they removed his olfactory groove. Oh my God, the names of these things. Olfactory groove meningioma. That's a mouthful. But essentially what happened was he had a lack of social interaction, and then again exhibited these sociopathic qualities. Distancing yourself from others, becoming agitative, and instigating conflict, and a lack of remorse.
I mean, yeah. So these people aren't born like that, but then something happened, like an injury. And obviously there is a correlation between these parts of the brain and potentially violent tendencies. Because obviously.
But what's interesting is these 85 cases who were conducted in 2019, and then also EVR, they haven't committed a violent crime.
Yeah.
But they have these qualities. So that's again kind of saying that, okay, well maybe there's a genetic or biological risk to becoming a violent sociopath or psychopath, but it may not be so cause and effect. It might just be a risk.
I want to establish that. No, I think that's where the nature nurture debate becomes more interesting, because I think it now has to become a balance, because obviously we can have these areas in the brain which are different to others, but something needs to trigger that. And I think this is the interesting part of the book, because it's written from the point of view of the mum. She kind of blames herself and blamed him throughout the book of why this happened. And I think let's just talk about the relationship between him and his mother. So now we're going to go as far away from biological science, just for brain.
Facts and reasons have left the building.
And we're going to talk about Freud and his theory of an Oedipus complex. Now, for those who don't know, an Oedipus complex, is a stage for a boy between 3 and 6 years old where he becomes unconsciously sexually attracted to his mother and hostile towards his father because he views him as a rival. So this envy and jealousy are aimed at the father, and it's at they constantly want the mother's attention. So there sort of becomes a rivalry, and then the boy feels castration anxiety. Let's not get into that part.
That part never made sense to me.
That happens. And so to cope with all this castration anxiety, the son identifies with the father, and so internalizes the attitudes, characteristics, values, and then kind of subconsciously hides this attraction to the mother by replacing it with the adoration for the father. And the reason why this is applicable to Kevin is because Kevin only seems to be identifying and getting along with his dad. He doesn't get along with his mum. He never has. And for some reason, it's only his dad. But controversially, and I'm sorry I have to reveal the twist, he ends up killing his dad and saving his mum, as in sparing.
And his sister. He kills his sister as well.
But why, if he's identified with a father, would he kill his dad and spare his mum? It just kind of seems like there is a subconscious motive. And I'm not saying Freud's theory is correct in any way. I'm just saying there's obviously maybe something subconscious that has happened. Obviously, it's
with Freud, with the whole Freud psycho psychodynamic approach, it is very clear parts of it are heavily influenced by his cocaine addiction. But I mean, what you're saying does have some merit, because there is a scene and the film kind of buys into this whole sort of like attraction to your mother and seeing your father as a rival, as a sexual rival, because there's a part in the film where the kid walks in on the parents having sex.
Yeah.
And after that, the scene after, he becomes particularly agitative and starts instigating conflict with his mother.
And it's just, that's another theory by another psychodynamic psychologist. We've just got a lot of approaches like this today. And her name is Melanie Klein. And she focused on Freud, but then developed it. So she was saying that a child since birth experiences a lot of anxiety from hunger, trauma from birth, all of these things. And because they have to deal with so much anxiety, they split objects into a good and bad pile to not contaminate. So the mother's breast could be divided as bad, and then the child now assumes the whole mother is bad. So that could have happened. And the problem with this is that it can also be unlocked by watching a primal scene. Now, a primal scene is a sexual scene between the mum, the dad, or whoever their guardians are, and they feel like they're not part of this union. So maybe if they've already labelled the mum as bad, and now they see that the mum is getting all this attention from the dad that it's just he's not getting involved in, maybe the ultimate punishment for his mum, because he hates her so much, is sparing her and making her live as a widow. And
but my question now is, how does all of that link, how does all of Freud's theory like link to making a sociopath? How can that explain a clear lack of empathy? Because from my side, I'm like the nature or the medical or biological factors going into it are such hard evidence. I mean, the Freud stuff can explain why it might come out.
Yeah.
But I think the biological stuff, from my opinion, is still sort of more hard factual evidence for how something like that might happen.
Yeah, agreed. But I'm going to say, let's say 70% 30. 70% biological. So there is parts of the brain, obviously, like predispositions. Everyone has kind of schizophrenia. The C4 gene, I believe, can be triggered. But then there has to be something else that triggers this kind of violent tendencies, and that can come from abuse. That can come from, I guess, not getting along with the mum. And we know that the mum at one point pushes the son and makes him break his arm. So this kind of event could trigger that, because as you said, there's studies where these people have the brain characteristics but don't end up being violent. So something else has to happen. There has to be nurture.
Okay. Okay.
Disagree.
Okay. The whole nurture is more of, it's more, you've kind of loaded a gun, and the nurture side of it is just pointing it in a certain direction. By that point, it's not, you're more aiming towards whatever you're aiming at. For example, if someone has 5-HT, I think it is, for what's it we've just been studying it. It's dropped out of my mind.
I don't know.
That's gonna bug me now. But anyway, if you have a damaged ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and then your parents start abusing you, you're going down the line of violent psychopath / sociopath. Whereas if you have a damaged ventral medial prefrontal cortex and your parents might push you to be successful in business, you're going down a very different path.
Obviously, I'm not saying that you have to be abused to become violent. That is not at all what I'm saying. But there is, much like the studies in the brain, there is a correlation. Let's say serial killers and getting abused when they were younger. That is a correlation. But
Okay, but there are also examples where people aren't abused.
No, exactly, which is why it's just a correlation and it's not established.
You know what, that actually brings me on to my next point, talking about correlations, and we've talked about mental illness, and we've gone very deep into sort of like school shooter territory.
Yeah.
Looking at school shooters, I mean, this all started with Adam Lanza, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia after murdering 20 kids and 6 adults at a school.
Heavy.
He got light subject matter, but he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and so what happened was the whole taboo started about sort of like, oh, you can kind of scapegoat mental illness for school shootings. Actually, the numbers don't always support that. For example, 60% of shootings in the United States are associated with mental illness. That's not diagnosed.
No.
the ones that are diagnosed is 5%.
Exactly.
And that's according to the US National Library of Medicine.
I mean, the thing is, let's say, they always, I think a lot of people will cleverly try and get out of a death
penalty.
Yeah, by saying reasons of insanity. But I think the controversial and kind of curious thing is that the children who commit these crimes, and we know Kevin did this before he was 16 years old, to not go to adult prison, so to be able to go to juvie
and not penitentiary. Yeah.
You could say he's just evil, but a lot of people like to put labels on these school shooter kids to be like, well, you know, it's not our responsibility. He's like that. Because it's just like a kid committing a crime, you know, some people, their brains haven't developed. But at what point does it become they're just evil or they're just ill?
Yeah. I mean, it's no joke. I mean, 2001 to 2010, there are 120,000 gun-related deaths in the United States. A large portion of that is suicides, but that should tell you something.
Yeah.
But then again, only 5% of those killings are clinically diagnosed with a mental illness, and they don't have to be sort of what we could consider violent mental illnesses. For example, depression is put under all this mental illness of sort of shootings, and a lot of that comes to suicides and depression. The whole problem with this is when you start associating sort of 60% versus an actual 5%, and say, okay, well, if what happened in 2008 with the US Supreme Court, they banned felons and mentally ill people from getting their hands on guns. Now, I'm not saying people should have access to a military-grade semi-automatic rifle like Adam Lanza did. Right. No one needs that to go on a hunting trip. I'm sorry, end of. But, huge but, when you start lumping in like a majority of people with these conditions, schizophrenia, depression, delusion, paranoia, and also sociopaths and psychopaths, when people have these conditions and you start lumping them in with a minority of that population, like Adam Lanza or other real evil people, if you start associating with them with those people, and then say, okay, well, because you're like that person and that person did that, I'm going to take that away from you. That I'm very much not on board with.
I think it's just this thing of not being able to, as you said, if only 5% are officially diagnosed, it's this thing where we have to potentially be able to implement these. Well, I don't want to be able to diagnose everyone because it's not everyone, but you have to have some sort of, not screening because that's unethical, some sort of measure at points in your life potentially where someone could kind of like analyze you, just see if there's any red flags, because obviously there's huge red flags, you know, people have when schizophrenia and things like that, but you know, maybe schools could have a system where they see someone become a tiny bit antisocial, just signs like that, maybe they could just keep a closer eye or get some help at home, because that could, in terms of school shooting, that could help a lot of people. Could save a lot of people.
Potentially, yes, but then you're further isolating someone based on, if it turns out that they do have problems with their brain, with the olfactory, or with their ventricle medial prefrontal cortex. If they have problems with that, or if they have certain genes that might cause them to have certain conditions,
yeah,
then are you isolating that person because of their behavior, or are you isolating that person because of what they might do?
It's just it's an,
because
yeah.
that's taking nurture and using it as an argument to take away liberties from people, which is why I'm more on board with sort of like the nature side of it, because it's very more objective, and it's very behavior equals that.
But you know, not everyone, that's the thing, we can say, and science is a really good basis for this, we could say these people with these densities or these characteristics should be kept an eye on, but the majority never develop, and that's the problem with this nature nurture debate. We're never going to solve it, because everyone has different opinions.
Well, no. An opinion isn't objective, it is only subjective, all right? So of course, as long as humans live and breathe, we will never solve any problem, because there will always be a subjective opinion that cannot be wrong. But but you can kind of say, with the more scientific and empirical data, that there is a much stronger case to be made for a nature sort of, as you said, like 70-30%. There's a lot of empirical data. I mean, I don't think it's any joke, like we talked about the 85 cases of people damaging these parts of their brain, then exhibit these personality changes. I don't think there is beyond a doubt that those two are linked.
Well,
that's a lot of cases. 85. That's no longer a correlation.
No, do you know what, I agree. I definitely think that majority is nature based, but I'm not going to neglect the nurture, and I think we're going to leave it there. So if you're listening, and you can write in the comments or send us a message what you guys believe. Is it nature, is it nurture, or is it a balance? And also, we're going to leave you with a question. How come after everything Kevin and Eva went through, he killed her daughter, he killed her husband, why does she still visit him? Let's leave it there for people to think about, because I think it's a very complicated answer and one we don't have time for today. But we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.